Hi, Dr. Risner and whoever else may happen to watch this video. This video is for the Foundations of Theater and Dance Pedagogy class, Module 5, Part 1. For the first part of this assignment, we were supposed to read a couple of articles and find some gender-based or gender-related concepts that resonated with us. And the application to how we wanted to address these in our teaching practice. The 5 most important areas for me with regard to the readings and sort of my personal pedagogy. The first was having a greater attention to social justice in arts education, particularly for me how the body is valued. There was a lot of discussion about the embodiment of dance, with its relation to gender, social status, race, etc., that our bodies have sort of their own memory that is displayed each time that we're creating dance or that we're dancing more than just what the choreography is. For me, prior to starting this class, sort of my teaching and my creative side of dance have always been a little bit separate, where technique class is for technique and creating new choreography or new movement is kind of a separate issue. And when we're talking about sort of embodiment, that's something that you could see in both aspects. And I'd like to be able to meld the two a little bit better rather than keeping them as 2 distinct parts. So to bring sort of that social justice that we tend to see much more in choreography into the actual classroom. The second concept that really resonated with me was using women's bodies and experiences as source material for choreography, and playing with sort of positive rather than negative self-images. Being that I am white, but female, I don't have much background in other races or ethnicities as far as my personal experiences, but I am female, so I have that going for me. And so I think for me, in a creative sense, sticking to what I know best, I think is easiest, but also more genuine than trying to make some grand statement about race when I'm very obviously white. But playing again with that positive rather than negative self-image. Not that I have had a lot of negative self-image problems myself, but I am on the heavier side, and typically girls of my size, particularly in dance, have issues with this quite a bit, and I think it can be very empowering for somebody especially at a professional level or at a higher level of education to sort of promote these positive self-image images to younger students. The third concept that I chose was the idea of opposing gender stereotypes, roles, behaviors by kind of blurring the lines or crossing boundaries, kind of like they do in drag. I do watch a lot of RuPaul's Drag Race and other shows that have been on the Logo channel, which is the LGBTQ channel. And I both enjoy watching it just for its entertainment value, but also I really enjoy that the purpose for them is more than just watching men put makeup on. It is, especially for RuPaul and his associates, it really is about bringing to light gender differences and crossing those boundaries and making it acceptable to sort of cross those boundaries. And I think, though again it may be difficult for me as somebody who doesn't identify with some other gender than my biological sex, it's a little bit difficult for me to see that, but I certainly encourage it with students and with peers. And I'd like to find a way to incorporate that more into my personal pedagogy. That being said, sort of the fourth concept that I found in the readings was using contact improvisation as an alternative to traditional gender roles. With contact improvisation, you work a lot with weight sharing, lifting, etc., that aren't necessarily determined by gender. It's not always the man lifting the woman. It can be man lifting a man, a woman lifting a woman lifting a man, etc., where you get a lot more interplay of the genders with regard to that. And it sort of brings up those ideas of homophobia a bit when you do see a man partnering with another man, and especially in a contact, a way where they're actually making contact with one another, rather than just, interacting with each other across the dance floor. But how this idea of homophobia kind of becomes addressed. Also the kind of power relations, so who is in charge in a certain scenario. That could be the person on the bottom, it could be the person on the top, during a lift or a weight sharing of some kind. But it also, as the authors of the two readings that we had to read for this section sort of mentioned, is that it opens up possibilities for more meaningful human interactions. I've always really enjoyed participating in contact improvisation, in part because I tend to be the larger of the two if I'm partnering with another female, and I tend to take on those more masculine roles. And as I'm one of those dancers that considers myself not a jumper, not a turner, not a balancer, that I tend to fit more easily into those roles of weight sharing and going in and out of the floor and things like that that are maybe not seen as like traditional dance movements as well. But that's just been an area that I'm really intrigued by as far as movement, but I think it also says a lot about gender roles in the dance classroom. The sort of last concept that really resonated with me was this new kind of focus on wellness, health and wellness, to better support, I would say, both genders in the dance classroom, but it's been very focused a lot on women, girls and women in the dance studio, because of the associations with problematic eating, anorexia and bulimia that are prevalent in boys as well, but there are higher percentages of girls that go through this with relation to dance. So my question really that I would like to address in my personal pedagogy is, how do we separate body image from health and wellness? A lot of health and wellness has been grounded in this idea of body image, and wanting to look perfect or have the perfect body, or be that ideal that is seen in the media. And health and wellness does not necessarily equate with that. Everybody has a different body shape, we all carry our weight differently. Obviously there are people that have that are a little more bottom heavy, a little more top heavy, and that's just the way that they genetically are predisposed to being shaped, whether that be just being overweight, being underweight, what have you. But how do we separate then that idea of what the perfect body is from what is healthy? And also taking into consideration that wellness includes sort of needing to have a positive self-image, because it keeps us more sane, and we're less likely to self-harm, and we're less likely to have this disordered eating. As a medical professional, this is just an area that I'm already interested in because of the work that I do as a physical therapist. And some of the workshops that I have already held with local studios focuses a lot, not just on overall health and wellness, but specifically on dance technique and dance technique classes, and how historically what we've been aiming for is the dancer's body, and how we can achieve better technique. But because we all have different body types, body shapes, our bone structure is different, our muscular makeup is different, that this very strict training regime that we've had for years and years and years is not always healthy for everyone's body. And so trying to inform dancers and teachers alike about some sort of negative practices that we've had in the past. As one of the articles mentioned, sort of a draconian training. But over the past few years, I have seen it especially in universities and in private studios, that there's a greater focus on sort of the physical health of a dancer's body, that we're paying more attention to the alignment of the knee over the ankle rather than just trying to achieve maximal turnout, that we're talking about using your turnout versus 180 degrees, which is anatomically basically impossible, only achievable by a couple specific people. But this is just an area I'm very interested in, and certainly plan to incorporate into my personal pedagogy. The second part of this assignment was to select 3 of the most appealing concepts that we either need or want to learn more about in order to address them pedagogically. The first one for me was understanding how boys or men versus girls and women experience dance class. Again, being female, I have not actually been able to live the experience of dance class through a man's eyes, through a boy's eyes. So it's a little bit difficult for me to conceptualize. You can talk about it, read about it, but it's different than actually experiencing it. And being a female teacher who may in the future teach men or boys, it's good to know what sort of things they pick up on from male teachers and from female teachers, and what sort of things that are influencing them, so that I can be better informed about how to interact with them in the dance classroom. The second sort of concept that I'm interested to know about, that one of the authors sort of started to illuminate, but didn't actually, it was not part of their initial study, was the way that gender is sort of addressed or taught in non-Western cultures. I think this is interesting just as a comparison with our own culture, as Western culture in particular has a very specific way that they address gender, that they teach gender, particularly with the access that we have to media that some other nations don't have. When they don't have access to internet and don't have televisions and don't have electricity the way that we do. I think it's also would be interesting to sort of reveal some different possibilities for the future of how we're teaching gender to the youth in America and in Western civilization. That there are other nationalities, other ethnicities that either are completely male-dominated or the opposite of that, which it's a very matriarchal society. And I think it would just be interesting to sort of compare and see what ways they're sort of teaching their young about gender in a completely different kind of society than the United States, and using that information to sort of change the way that we do things here. The last concept that, again, the authors sort of touch on, but obviously recognize that it's kind of beyond the scope of their article, is discussing sort of non-binary gender and race and their influences on sort of our hidden curriculum in a dance class. Again, as a white female, someone who identifies with my biological sex, I don't have, personal experience being another race and being of a different gender, non-binary gender. That being said, it would be good for me to understand this information going forward, because I will be faced with teaching people from both of these groups. And rather than being completely ignorant to their lives and what they go through, I think I'd like to know more about how they sort of fit into the current structure of a dance class, and what sort of things they need from me to make it a more inclusive environment. So the last part of this assignment is to sort of discuss the bigger picture and how it relates to developing my personal pedagogy. Being, again, a white female, it gives me enough information about being white and being female in a dance population, but I understand that I am still lacking insight into what it's like to be a dancer as another race, another ethnicity, another gender, from another class system, etc. I think these are all things that I need to learn a little bit more about, discover, and I know that we'll be doing a little bit of that with our the project in Module 8, the Immersion project. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. With regard to my own personal pedagogy as it stands now, again, as a health provider, I sort of aim towards looking at dance not from a perspective of how do we perfect our technique and how do we become this like perfect, beautiful dancer, but more about how do we continue to stay healthy, how do we understand our bodies better to know what we are capable of and what we're not, to be able to continue to dance and to continue to be able to sort of spread our message through a dance vocabulary or through dance movement. Yeah, I'm very interested in sort of the health aspect of things, but at the same time, I am curious and very interested to kind of start down that other path of gender, race, ethnicity, etc., and sort of to be able to address that in my personal pedagogy. Thanks.